Never anger a man of the cloth!
When it comes to RPGs, Obsidian Entertainment have really proven they know what the hell they're doing, and their work on Fallout New Vegas made it one of the better games for the series. I think most people would agree. So when it was announced they'd be working on their very own first-person action RPG with an entirely new IP, developed by the same guys who worked on the original Fallout series, well, it was something to take notice of. Now, here we are, and The Outer Worlds has finally been released, and you know what? It's pretty good.
Says someone who's never had any fun.
And it's kind of odd in a way, because Outer Worlds doesn't really do anything all that new or game-changing. I mean, the writing and the dialogue is top-notch stuff, but a lot of the elements of the gameplay feel like something out of a game from 10 years ago. All of the other mechanics like the skill system, fast traveling, modifying weapons and all that kind of stuff is pretty much par for the course. It plays it all very safe. What differentiates it though is two things. Firstly, the dialogue.
What else would it be?
There's a real attention to the storytelling aspect of the game just in the sheer amount of dialogue options. You can actually play a role. If you want to be a Boy Scout and go around helping everyone out like some kind of futuristic David Carradine, or be a huge dickbag to everyone and instigate fights all the time, well, you can do that.
You convinced her to let us leave in peace.
But mostly, the thing that makes Outer Worlds so good is that it just does all of this stuff so well. It's somehow managed to pull off all of these mechanics almost flawlessly. In the 20 or so hours I spent with the game, I never had any quests break and become unbeatable. And the only time my game crashed was in the final mission, but there was an easy workaround that let me keep playing. For a game like this, that alone is kind of staggering. Everything works the way it's supposed to, and what's probably the saddest thing about that statement is that in 2019, that is considered to be a rarity, and something worth praising. A game that simply hits its mark and achieves what it sets out to do without being a reprehensible disaster is, in this day and age, considered a rarity.
I reckon I don't see any better solution.
The story in Outer Worlds is that you're a happy-go-lucky colonist heading off to work for a company named Halcyon, put in hibernation for 10 years and sent off-world on a spaceship to seek a prosperous future among the stars. Turns out your ship got lost in space though, and you've been drifting around for close to 70-odd years. You're rescued by a guy named Phineas Wells who has the decency to wake you up, but also says that because you've been in hibernation for so long, a nasty side effect of being woken up means you'll basically turn into liquid, unless he uses some kind of special substance in the process.
It's called explosive cell death, but it's really more of a liquefaction.
Using the last of this stuff on the player, you're then tasked with helping him recover more of it, so you can free the remaining colonists that are still in hibernation on your ship. The only catch is that Phineas is a wanted man, dead or alive across the galaxy. So ultimately your choice is whether or not to side with Phineas or Halcyon's corporate board. The board views Phineas as a sort of mad scientist whose intent of waking up a few hundred colonists is seen as more of a strain on an already struggling society. You see, Outer Worlds is set during a period where corporations have control, and people are treated as assets. Even committing suicide is seen as a crime and defined as damage to company property.
Suicide's a crime. The legal term is irreparable damage to company property. What Eugene did to himself was vandalism.
And when someone is dead and buried, they still owe money to the corporations and have to lease out their own grave. I mean, you're not just buried in a hole in the ground, you're renting out that hole. Seems about on par with property prices in Australia. So you create your own character in a character creator screen that has some of the most horrific looking randomized faces I've ever seen, then you set out on your journey. And along the way, your interactions with a few other factions decide their fate, as well as what happens to Phineas. It's really a bit of a binary choice in the end though, as all of these other factions are really just ancillary. And if you want, you can even turn Phineas into the board the first chance you get.
I'm plenty serious.
Dialogue really forms a huge component for Outer Worlds gameplay, and you're constantly stopping and talking to people along the way. NPCs are divided up into various factions, and often the actions you do for one faction might have a negative effect on the other, to the point that it becomes possible for someone to never even want to speak to you over something you've done. It's a great system that Obsidian absolutely nailed in Fallout New Vegas, a game which it's hard to not make comparisons to. Throughout the game, you'll find new companions who join you on the ship, and these guys can serve as the angels or the devils on your shoulder, helping you process your thoughts and see certain situations from another perspective.
You're just a parasite, living off my goodwill. Well, guess what? My goodwill's exhausted, along with my temper.
Being given the options to persuade, intimidate, or outright lie to people during dialogue also opens up lots more avenues for mission progression.
Hell, I ain't gonna pass up free bits. Make it painful.
You can even skip entire quests if you've got the gift of the gab. Your responses can be polite, snarky, or aggressive, which is either going to make people more agreeable or even just piss them off. What I actually appreciate about Outer Worlds 2 is that they've taken the time and the effort with the facial animations, and it makes a stark contrast from so many other, mostly Western RPGs, where you just feel like you're interacting with talking heads.
Truthfully spoken.
The depth of field is really low when you're in a conversation too, so you're not distracted, and there's even an artificial backlight added to an NPC to make them look more prominent. If you've got someone in your party with you too, it can also affect the dialogue as well, causing unique encounters. In fact, at one point, having a character in my party allowed me to avoid conflict entirely, because the group that wanted to murder the piss out of me recognized the guy that I was with and let me off the hook.
Hey, Felix! Look, everyone, it's Felix!
Well, hey there, your lordship. Good to see you again.
Anyway, at one point or another, words are going to fail, and you're going to have to start getting out there and killing things. Now, the combat in Outer Worlds is pretty basic stuff. You've got a bunch of weapons, all of which are level based and do varying amounts of DPS. There's a few different types of pistols, you've got rifles, shotguns, and heavy machine guns, then also energy based weapons as well. Then you've got the science weapons, which are a bit more novelty based. Melee weapons are either one or two-handed, with there being a pretty basic system of being able to block and dodge as well. You can also do power and sweep attacks for increased damage and to stagger enemies. It's textbook stuff. Outer Worlds also has its own form of bullet time, which is called time dilation, apparently a side effect of being in hibernation for so long. What this does is allow you to see some information on a targeted enemy. It shows their weaknesses and their level, as well as increase the amount of damage you do when hitting their weak spots. It's basically the game's version of VATS from the Fallout series. Other than that, you just kind of point your crosshair at something and press the left mouse button. Modifying weapons can give them better stats, like increased magazine sizes or faster swing speeds for melee weapons, or even different elemental effects. But going with melee or ranged weapons is a bit more of a personal choice than anything else. I mean, melee definitely does more damage, and you can often finish off enemies in a few hits, but then you've also got to close the gap to be able to hit them in the first place, which can be a bit of an issue. Ranged weapons are a safer choice, and it's pretty easy just schwacking someone from a distance with an assault rifle, but that can get a bit boring just using the same weapon over and over. Instead of stimp packs, you've got an inhaler, which is always stocked up with this kind of magical healing substance called Adreno by default. But throwing skill points into your medicine also lets you pack this inhaler with other drugs, which can give off quick buffs as well. And you'll be huffing down this stuff during combat like some kind of asthmatic. You can of course try to stealth past enemies, which can be a viable choice, but when you're detected, everyone seems to know where you are. Just felt like I was missing out on XP and items by not killing everything. Still, the combat does its job. No more, no less. It's not janky and it is bug-free, but it's still probably one of the weakest aspects of the game, only because it just doesn't really try to do anything different. I think the best way to describe the combat would be serviceable. You know what I mean? It fulfills its function. The companions you bring along with you off the ship also form the other members of your party, and you can bring 2 of these guys to help you out during combat, which can also add a bit of variety. Some of the shit they say during combat is pretty funny too.
I smite you in the name of the law!
This whole mechanic reminds me a lot of the Mass Effect games, the way that both of them have their own unique attack animations, even down to the selection screen, which looks just like Mass Effect's. You can choose what kind of armor or weapons they use, and they've even each got their own quests, which give you a bit more of their backstory. But there doesn't seem to be any point to doing these outside of just some static text you get during the game's ending.
I gotta remember that one.
Bit of a bummer though how you're so limited in how you utilize these guys during combat. You can essentially ping an enemy so everyone attacks it at the same time, and you can give them orders to move to a specific position. But it's not really tactical in any sense of the word, and they've only got one ability each, which works off a cooldown. Once you've seen that animation for their special attack for the 10th or so time, it starts to get a bit tiring. And you've got to put some serious skill points into them to actually make them all that useful, otherwise they just get dropped like a bag of shit. The main reason I brought these guys along most of the time was just so enemies had something else to shoot at aside from me, and also because certain characters give you buffs to your skill points. I mean, you can go solo if you'd prefer, but it just makes the whole thing feel lonely.
Thanks, mister.
Outer Worlds is at times a pretty good looking game, and it helps that it usually runs really well. The environments look really artistic and the character models are highly detailed, right down to being able to notice the individual scars on someone's face. But the problem is that the visuals can be kind of inconsistent. It's a lot like the ending of The Wizard of Oz when the wizard is hiding behind the curtain and tells Dorothy not to look behind it. It's kind of how I feel about Outer Worlds. It looks great when you're navigating through somewhere that the game wants you to see, but go too far off the beaten path and you'll see areas that look very simplistic and barren. It's almost like the level designers didn't have time to finish adding in all the little details. Runs on the Unreal 4 engine, which, like the Unreal 3 engine, is quickly becoming the town bicycle of game engines. And they've included some awful post-processing effects here too, with some chromatic aberration that's gonna make your eyes bleed. Visual settings in the menu are also a bit ambiguous as to what it is you're turning on or off. There's a day and a night cycle too, but it's purely for show. I mean, it's not like NPCs go off and go to sleep or move around the town. A guy that's tending the bar is always going to be tending that bar 24/7.
Exactly.
It also has that same retro futuristic look that the Fallout games do, which I find kind of odd. I mean, Fallout was also set in the future, but that was a future where nuclear war halted cultural advancement, so it kind of made sense. Here in Outer Worlds though, it takes place 300 years in the future. It does seem a bit odd. I mean, it's probably just been done to mix up the environments. There's areas that feel like you're in some kind of futuristic frontier town. Like if some space tumbleweeds started rolling by, it wouldn't have felt out of place. Despite being able to fly to all these planets and visit all these different settlements though, there's actually very little to see and do in any of them. Side quests are pretty much unmissable, mostly because NPCs who hand them out are usually always named and stick out like a sore thumb. Byzantium is the capital city of one of the main planets you visit, and it's this large, sprawling metropolis with these upper market boutiques and fancy storefronts. And yet, half the place is boarded up and inaccessible. You won't be going around breaking into people's homes because there's nothing to break into. It feels lifeless. I mean, this is the capital city. It should be teeming with life and activity.
I detect an elevated heart rate, indicating dishonesty.
Like all RPGs, Outer Worlds has a bunch of different skills you can put into points and improve over time as you level up, but the way they've done it here is a little bit different. For starters, when it comes to the individual skill points, until a skill point is raised to 50, you're also able to level up the other 2 skills in its category at the same time. So essentially, you're able to level up 3 skills with 1 skill point. When you reach level 50, you then have to specialize in a specific skill from that point on. But I mean, even with every skill around 50, it's really easy to be a jack of all trades. And even if you don't like your choices, you can just respec anyway. At certain points in the game, you've got the option to take up a character flaw, which gives you a reduced stat with a bonus perk point as compensation. But I think the negative effect of these flaws outweighs the value of another perk point. So it seems like a bit of a useless mechanic unless you purposefully want to handicap yourself.
But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?
Lockpicking and hacking something is just aiming your crosshair at a locked door or terminal and then just holding down the interact button for a few seconds. There's no lockpicking or hacking mechanic or anything like that, it's all been bypassed. Then there's some forced stealth moments in the game where you go into these restricted areas, where this holographic disguise covers your whole body so you can blend in. But these are pretty much unfailable, because even if your suit runs out of energy, you can still talk your way out of being caught up to 3 times.
What are you talking about?
Armor is really basic too, you've just got a chest piece and a headpiece. That's it. Customization comes from equipping armor with mods, of which you can equip up to 4, but it's still a very simple armor system. There's no rings or trinkets or necklaces, any of that stuff. Like I said, it's pretty basic. What also doesn't help is the way the game distributes items and supplies. Even early on in the game, I was absolutely flushed with healing items and ammo. The game is laughably easy on normal difficulty, which is the so-called intended difficulty mode. So I bumped things up to hard, but the only difference is that enemies have much more health points and deal out more damage. It's that good old-fashioned artificial difficulty bullshit, like they're not smarter or more intelligent, they just hit harder and soak up more damage. Still, I think most people should be playing the game on hard mode by default, otherwise there's just no challenge whatsoever. But even still, you've got so many weapons and items that it's still more than easy to deal with anything the game throws at you. The other answer to this is the supernova difficulty, which makes the whole thing extremely tough, but you shouldn't really need to play the novelty difficulty mode just to get a challenge. there's never really any enemy type you come up against that's one of those oh shit kind of encounters. Remember in New Vegas when you'd see a Deathclaw and scramble to get yourself together to beat it? Well, Outer Worlds has nothing like that. Some guns are so overpowered that you can kill an enemy before it's even in range to attack you, and once I'd put some points in melee weapons, I was just shredding through everything. I assume this has all just been done to make the game more accessible to newer players. Just means that almost everything is achievable for pretty much a first time playthrough. The result is a game that everyone can play, which is a good thing, but it's one that seems like it's too scared to take too many risks. The last few missions in the game just seem kinda rushed, like they just gave up and started trying to wrap things up and be done with it. A lot of the earlier story missions can take 2 or so hours to get through, depending on how much time you personally want to spend on them. But then the last few missions are so much more straightforward and can be finished in 20 or 30 minutes.
What are you talking about?
I'm also bummed out there's no romantic options in the game either. I've got 6 companions in this game and you're telling me I can't have sex with any of them.
That was fast.
In Mass Effect, you better believe I tried to sleep with every piece of ass I could get. Every piece. And it's not like Outer Worlds doesn't have any sexuality either. There's an entire goddamn questline where you spend your own cash helping one of your companions to go out on a date with some greasy mechanic. But you're telling me my boy can't even get his own rocks off.
Now, hold on, this isn't the end of the world. Probably.
I don't know, maybe the lack of libido is due to being stuck in hibernation for so long. Objectively faulting Outer Worlds is a pretty tricky thing to do because there really is nothing that it does outright badly. My first playthrough took me about 15 hours and I managed to finish pretty much all of the side missions and hit the level cap before I'd even finished the main campaign. It's a solid game that works the way it's supposed to and it does what it says on the box. If this is the start of a new series though, which I hope it is, at least they've got a solid foundation to build upon.
Wait. What the fuck is this? Is this French? I can't fucking read French.
The Outer Worlds are definitely still worth visiting. I guess I was just hoping for the stars to be a bit more bedazzling.